So, okay, 1917, the U.S. is jumping into World War I, and everyone's worried about protecting the war effort. That's where this Espionage Act comes in.
Exactly. It's passed right alongside this other one, the Trading with the Enemy Act. And yeah, the goal was to stop anything that messed with the military. Think like classic spy stuff, sabotage, or, stopping people from signing up.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets interesting. It also gave the government a ton of power to go after anyone who was speaking out against the war.
So wait, it wasn't just about spies sneaking around. It was about controlling what people were saying, too.
Exactly. If you were seen as going against the war effort, even if you weren't technically spying, you could be in serious trouble. A good example is Eugene V. Debs. He was a socialist leader, actually ran for president.
Hold on, ran for president? From where, jail?
You got it.
Yeah.
He ran his campaign from prison. They put him away for 10 years just for giving his speech against the war. And it wasn't just individuals. Even a film, The Spirit of 76, got caught in the crossfire. It was about the American Revolution, but they seized it because it showed British soldiers in a bad light. Could you imagine trying to censor history like that today?
Seriously. It just shows how a law that starts with good intentions, like protecting the country, can end up having these crazy consequences, like limiting what people can even say or think. And this wasn't just a temporary wartime thing, was it? This Espionage Act, it stuck around.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the biggest ways it left its mark was through the postal system. The Postmaster General, the guy in charge of the mail, he was suddenly given this huge power to seize anything he thought was unpatriotic. They were basically controlling information through the mail.
Well, it's kind of scary when you think about it, like an early version of censorship before the internet and everything. So people just accepted that. They couldn't read or send whatever they wanted.
Well, there was pushback. From the start, this act got people riled up about free speech. And that's where this really important Supreme Court case comes in Schenck v. United States.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so this Schenck guy, he was sending out these pamphlets against the war, and
Okay.
the Supreme Court, they said his conviction was legit, but, and this is important, they also came up with this clear and present danger idea, like a test for when the government could actually limit free speech.
So it's like that classic saying, right? You can't just yell fire in a crowded theater and say, hey, free speech.
Exactly. The government can step in if what you're saying is going to cause real immediate harm. But of course, that just leads to a whole other bunch of questions. Who gets to decide what's dangerous enough? Where do you draw that line?
And looking back, it seems like those lines got pretty blurry, especially during that whole Red Scare thing.
You're right. The Red Scare was all about fear of communism, right? People were paranoid. And the Espionage Act, well, it became a way to target anyone they thought might be a radical, even if they weren't actually spies.
Makes you think about how easy it is to go too far. We're trying to protect the country, but then we end up silencing anyone who disagrees with us. So after the Red Scare died down, did the Espionage Act just fade away too?
Not a chance. It
Yeah.
kept popping up. Like during World War II, there was this Catholic priest, Father Charles Coughlin. He had a radio show. And Coughlin! Wait, I think I've heard that name. He was spreading some pretty awful stuff, wasn't he? Like anti-Semitic propaganda?
He was. And even though hate speech is technically protected under the First Amendment, the government used his pro-Nazi views and the whole wartime situation to shut down his mailing permit. They said he couldn't send his stuff through the mail anymore. There it is again. That same question of when the government can step in and restrict speech, even if it's hateful, if they can call it a matter of national security. And this wasn't the end either, right? The Espionage Act, it really came alive during the Cold War.
Oh, yeah. The Cold War brought a whole new level of tension with the Soviet Union, and the Espionage Act became a major weapon in the fight against communist spies. One of the most famous examples from that time is the case of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg.
The Rosenbergs, their story is like a warning sign about how bad things can get. They were accused of giving atomic secrets to the Soviets.
Yeah, they were convicted under the Espionage Act in 1951 and executed just a couple years later, even though they insisted they were innocent to the very end.
Wow. It's a case that still gets people talking today, right? Like, was it a fair trial? Did they really do it? Was it just paranoia because of the Cold War?
It brings up so many questions about justice and how much power the government should have when it comes to national security, especially during those times of intense fear and suspicion. And here's the thing. Even as the Cold War started to wind down, the Espionage Act didn't just disappear. Things actually got even more complicated because that's when whistleblowers and leaks started becoming a bigger part of the story.
Yeah, it's like the end of the Cold War didn't make the Espionage Act go away. It just kind of ushered in this whole new phase where the lines between national security and, the public's right to know it all got really blurry.
And that's where we get into that whole debate about whistleblowers, people like Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers, right? Exactly. So Ellsberg, he used to work for the military as an analyst, and in 1971, he leaked all these classified documents to the New York Times. These papers exposed a lot of secret stuff about what the U.S. government was doing in Vietnam. And of course, they slapped him with charges under the Espionage Act. His case was huge. People were arguing left and right. Was he a traitor for leaking those secrets? Or was he a hero for revealing the truth?
It's a tough one. The case ended up in a mistrial, but it really got people thinking differently about whistleblowing. Like, when does the public's right to know outweigh the government's need to keep things under wraps? It's a question we're still grappling with today.
And it's even more complicated now with cases like Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden in more recent years.
Both charged under that same Espionage Act, Manning, for leaking classified information about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Snowden for exposing all those government surveillance programs.
Right, and those cases sparked international debates. I mean, they still do.
Yeah.
Some people see Manning and Snowden as heroes. They risk everything to expose what they believed was wrongdoing. But then you have others who say they put national security at risk. It all comes back to that question. What are we willing to give up for security? And who gets to decide?
It's a heavy question. And it seems like even after all these years, that Espionage Act is still right there in the middle of it all. A law from 1917 still shaping these huge debates today.
It really goes to show you, the law, it's not always so black and white. It can be used for good, like protecting the country, but it can also be used to silence people and hide the truth. That's why it's so important to understand its history, how it's changed over time, and how it's been used in different ways. It's essential if we're going to have these tough conversations about freedom and security and what kind of democracy we want to live in.
So where does that leave us? Well, next time you see a news story about leaks or whistleblowers or the government trying to keep secrets, think back to this Espionage Act. Remember those early cases, the political climates that shaped them, and the individuals who put themselves on the line because they believed the public deserved to know the truth? It's a story that's still being written, and your understanding of it can help you make sense of the world around you.
Don't settle for easy answers. Dig deeper. Look at all sides of the issue and keep asking those hard questions about right and wrong and where we draw the line. Because ultimately, this Espionage Act, it's not just a relic of the past. It's a reflection of our ongoing struggle to find that balance between freedom and security in an increasingly uncertain world.
And that, my friend, is your deep dive into the Espionage Act of 1917, a trip through history that's surprisingly relevant to the present day. Keep asking those tough questions, keep exploring, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Deep Dive.